A cup of tea. Every evening, Mrs. Wilson sat by her window and looked across the street. She lived alone in a small house that had once been full of laughter and noise. Years ago, her husband and children filled every room with life. But now the house was quiet. The only sound she heard most days was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Across the street lived Mr. Harris. He was also alone. He had moved into the neighborhood many years earlier. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke to anyone. He spent most of his time working in his garden or reading books on his front porch. Although they had lived across from each other for nearly 10 years, Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Harris barely spoke. In fact, they did not like each other very much. The problem had started many years ago because of a misunderstanding. One afternoon, Mrs. Wilson believed that Mr. Harris had damaged her flower garden while parking his truck. She became upset and complained to several neighbors. Mr. Harris heard about it and felt hurt because he had done nothing wrong. Instead of talking directly to each other, they allowed the misunderstanding to grow. As the years passed, silence built a wall between them. Whenever they crossed paths, they simply looked away. Neither of them wanted to be the first to apologize. One cold autumn morning, Mrs. Wilson woke up feeling weak. She had caught a bad cold. Her head hurt, and her body felt tired. Even getting out of bed seemed difficult. She looked outside and saw dark clouds covering the sky. It was going to rain. Normally, she enjoyed taking care of her small garden. But that day, she did not have the strength. She sat by the window wrapped in a blanket and watched the rain begin to fall. Hours passed. The weather became worse. Strong wind blew through the neighborhood, shaking trees and knocking leaves across the street. As evening approached, someone knocked on her door. Mrs. Wilson was surprised. She rarely had visitors. Slowly, she walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was Mr. Harris. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mr. Harris held up a small tray. On the tray was a steaming cup of tea. "I noticed you haven't been outside today," he said softly. "I thought you might not be feeling well." Mrs. Wilson stared at him in surprise. After all these years, she never expected him to be standing at her door. She looked at the tea. The warm steam rose into the cold air. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mr. Harris nodded. "I hope you feel better soon." Then he turned and walked back into the rain. Mrs. Wilson closed the door and carried the tea to her kitchen table. She sat down and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. For the first time in many years, she thought about the wall that had existed between them. A wall built from assumptions, silence, and pride. As she slowly drank the tea, she felt something unexpected. Guilt. What if she had been wrong all those years? What if the misunderstanding had never been Mr. Harris's fault? The next morning, she felt slightly better. She looked outside and saw Mr. Harris working in his garden. For several minutes, she watched him through the window. Then she made a decision. She put on her coat, walked outside, and crossed the street. Mr. Harris looked up as she approached. He seemed surprised. Mrs. Wilson took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you for the tea," she said. Mr. Harris smiled. "You are welcome." There was an awkward silence. Then Mrs. Wilson spoke again. "I'm sorry." Mr. Harris looked confused. "For what?" "For many years ago," she replied. "I blamed you for something without ever talking to you first." The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled gently. "I should apologize too," he said. "I was hurt, and I stopped trying to be friendly." Both of them laughed softly. The tension that had existed for years suddenly felt much smaller. That afternoon, they sat together on Mr. Harris's porch. They talked for hours. They shared stories about their families, their childhoods, and the lives they had lived. Mrs. Wilson discovered that Mr. Harris had once traveled around the country as a young man. Mr. Harris learned that Mrs. Wilson loved painting and had created hundreds of beautiful pictures over the years. As the sun began to set, neither of them wanted the conversation to end. For the first time in a decade, they felt less alone. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. A new friendship slowly grew. Every afternoon, one of them would prepare tea. Sometimes they sat on Mrs. Wilson's porch. Sometimes they sat on Mr. Harris's porch. The tea became a simple tradition, but it meant much more than a warm drink. It became a symbol of forgiveness, a symbol of understanding, a symbol of second chances. Their neighbors soon noticed the change. People who had once seen two lonely individuals now saw two friends laughing together. The friendship brought new energy into both of their lives. Mrs. Wilson smiled more often. Mr. Harris seemed happier than anyone could remember. One winter evening, while snow gently covered the streets, Mrs. Wilson looked at her friend and smiled. "Can you believe we spent 10 years avoiding each other?" she asked. Mr. Harris laughed. "It seems foolish now." Mrs. Wilson nodded. "All because we never had one honest conversation." Mr. Harris lifted his teacup. "Better late than never." She raised her cup as well. "Better late than never." Years later, people in the neighborhood would still remember their friendship. Not because of anything extraordinary, not because they became famous, but because they reminded everyone of something important. Many problems grow because people stop talking. Many friendships are lost because of pride. And sometimes, healing begins with something very small. A kind word, a simple apology, or even a single cup of tea.